welcome. Thanks again for joining us for this month's Dr. G Chat with resilience expert, Dr. Deborah Gilboa. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping items to share. If you could remain on mute during the presentation so that we can limit disruption, that would be fantastic. This presentation will be recorded, as you just heard, and linked on YouTube for later review and sharing. And finally, feel free to put your questions in the chat if you don't want to forget them as you're thinking about them, and we will open it up for questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I welcome Dr. G. Thanks for being here with us today.
Hi, I'm really glad to talk about this. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, so the timely topic today is coming off of St. Patrick's Day weekend. So happy belated St. Patrick's Day to everyone here. We know that lucky people kind of bounce back when things don't go their way. So Dr. G, can you tell us how some people can just be so darn lucky? And could it have something to do with resilience?
So you might or may not be surprised to know that there's a fair amount of research on luck. And one of the things that I found most interesting when I dove into it is that people define luck differently. The one thing that most people agree on is that luck is if a truly unexpected, very unlikely thing happens the way you need it to. So you are, I'm going to use a cartoon example, walking by an open window and a baby grand piano drops from a window above you and you just barely escape it. Or I have a good friend actually who recently was crossing a street when a big truck came through a red light and she jumped out of the way, and the direction she jumped, she broke her ribs, but she did not get hit by the Tesla that was coming the other direction. So she and her partner talked a lot about how lucky it was because she had no time to make that decision. She just did it. But this brings us to a much more common interpretation of the word luck, and that's the story we tell afterwards. And this is something where toys and games play a huge role, because it turns out that a lot of what luck is, as we use the word commonly, is actually our perception and the story we tell about something after it happened. You could understand if your friend called you with that story and said, how unlucky am I that I was the one crossing at the intersection when a truck sped through the red light and almost killed me. I mean, genuinely almost killed her, right? Like there's no question that is what almost happened. Or she and her husband could tell the story they do, which is, how lucky am I that when I had to make a split second, I don't even remember deciding, I just jumped. It happened to be to the side that saved my life. And this is one of the places that we can really positively impact children, is helping them to think. We can't force them to take an optimistic view. And something we've talked about before a little bit, Ahren, is how optimism, interestingly, it's a trait. When we measure how optimistic someone is when they're 7, as they did in the Harvard happiness study, have you all heard of that study? It's an 80-year-long, it's still going on study. And every once in a while, they publish really interesting stuff where they've been looking at people for just the same people and their families for just generations. One of the things they found is that when you measure optimism in elementary aged kids, and you measure it again when they're in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's pretty equal. There's some variation in adolescence and early adulthood about optimism, but that how well we expect things to come out is based far more on something innate than it is on our life experiences. So it turns out, though, that what we can affect, we can't decide, I'm going to make kids see the silver lining in every situation. Parents have been trying that for decades, maybe longer, doesn't always work. What you can do is ask kids to think of multiple stories to go with the same action figures, the same beginning of a story, the same outcome. And when you do that, when you ask them to look for multiple possibilities, you open their minds and you build the skills, some of them, that are inherent in resilience. Ahren, you said some people just seem, lucky people just seem to bounce back a little bit easier. And you're going to see how this is sort of this cyclic thing, and it's really hard to find the chicken and the egg, because a lot of people who consider themselves lucky do actually have an easier time getting through difficulty or getting through change. In my work, I define resilience as any change you navigate, not just the hard stuff. Even the getting your dream birthday party takes some resilience. As a matter of fact, in our family, we used to laugh. Is it if a child doesn't cry at the birthday party, how do you know it was their birthday party? Right? There's so much expectation, so much emotion, so much buildup. Most birthday kids cry at some point during the party. I would say legitimately up through 10, 20, 40 years old, right? So it's all change that requires us to be somewhat resilient. But you're right that people who consider themselves lucky also often get through hard things more easily. And it may very well be because of that skill of creating a narrative for yourself that helps you see how, even though it didn't turn out the way you pictured, it could still turn out really well. It could still be enjoyable or help you meet your goals, is the same skill that helps us perceive ourselves as lucky. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? You can drop them in the chat, or even, I think with this size group, unmute if you have any feedback about that. I've seen a couple of people nodding, a couple of people sort of canting their head as they try and take this in. Anybody have any pushback or feedback about that?
I have one question about the Harvard study, which I do know, but I have a question about optimism being a trait versus all the research on learned optimism, and that you can actually develop optimism even if you don't have it. How do you think about that?
So optimism is a great deal of what we call optimism is about, again, that story you tell either prospectively, meaning before something happens, or retrospectively after it happened. And you can learn this skill of opening to change, which is a resilient skill, opening to the possibility that the way you pictured getting to the goal isn't the only way. All the games and all the toys that we make available to kids that challenge them to think, well, if you didn't get that, and I'm going to try and use a young kid example. You know, if you can't win Monopoly by buying up all the properties, can you win Monopoly in a different way, right? We're asking kids to think about, oh, yeah, somebody already bought the really big, pricey properties before you even made it that far on the board. Do you just flip the board and game over? Or do you think, what are some other ways to amass fortune in this game? That skill of thinking, are there other ways to get to what I want? Does this thing where they bought up those two things, is it actually an opportunity for me? Because now they don't have money to buy a whole bunch of smaller properties as they come back around that board. I like using Monopoly only because a lot of people are really familiar with how the game works. But that idea, we translate that as optimism in some of the research. We tend to think, oh, well, so that's being optimistic. Optimism, the way the Harvard Happiness Study was looking at it, was a little bit more drilled down into only, what do you expect from this generic possibility? Do you think it is likely to go your way or likely to not go your way? And but it turns out that most multifactorial things can be learned and developed. I hope that was a useful answer to that question. What's so useful about toys and games is that play is where we really start to learn those skills and develop them. All of the long LARPs, long action role play. No, I'm getting the two of those words wrong. LARPs. Anybody remember what that stands for? The RP is role playing games, right? But so those longer story where multiple episodes that players create together give lots of opportunities because you come up against the giant that, steals all your supplies. If you don't end the game, you're saying, okay, not only resilience, how can I get through this, but now I don't have anything to carry. And that thing I wanted to do, or that spell I cast before, the person who's running the game told me I couldn't because I'm carrying such a heavy bag. And now I'm not carrying a bag because the giant stole it. So here's an opportunity to do that thing I wanted to do because I have nothing in my hands. That ability to look at a situation and think, is there opportunity here? That's the prospective of luck, and the opportunity to look backwards and say, not just it could have been worse, but looking for opportunities for gratitude specifically. What could I be grateful for in this situation? That actually turns out to translate in the way we speak it into, boy, I was lucky, or I'm so lucky.
Can I ask you one more question? So the flip of that, in terms of kids that have a lot of anxiety, right? And trying to address that anxiety by building resilience. I've been told that one of the ways to do it is you actually take kids down the catastrophe path. And so you take them down and each step, like, okay, and then what's the worst that could happen? You know, my mom's not going to pick me up on time. Okay, what's the worst that would happen if my mom didn't pick me up on time?
Mhm.
You know, oh, then the teacher would have to wait. Okay, and then what happens if the teacher can, you know, all the way to like the absolute worst thing that could happen is they're just in the office waiting a few minutes and they're still safe, right? Is there anything in terms of play that would take them down that reverse trajectory to make them understand that it's not that bad if they're an anxious kid and you're trying to build the resilience?
So the strategy you're talking about, I call what if, right? So somebody, and you might do this with a friend. Somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm so worried that this," and you say, "Oh, I hear you." So the first thing is empathy. I heard a great phrase recently about this specifically, Jacqueline, where someone said, "You can be right and empathetic, but not in that order." When you're talking to somebody else, you can always be right and empathetic, but never in that order. So if you're trying to get somebody on board with you, a kid or an adult, but let's focus on kids, and the first thing to do is show empathy. It is hard to feel scared about that. It sounds like it does not feel good. The thoughts that are in your mind, the story that seems most likely to you or that you're telling right now sounds like a hard story. I hear you. Right. And empathy is not agreeing with the emotion. Empathy is noticing it and believing it. It's true for you. Okay. Then you say, what if, but a way to do what you're talking about. Okay, tell me what would happen. If that happened, what's the worst that would happen? Okay. And then if that did happen, what's the worst that would happen? And now you get that kid to, I'm in the office, everybody's staring at me, my mom's not there, and I'm not doing my homework. If you can say, I hear that all that would be true, and is there anything good about being the only kid in the office? Well, the person who lets everybody in the front door keeps candy on their desk, and I suppose they might give me a piece. Okay, I see how that would be fun. What else is good about your parent being late? Anything? There might be nothing. And you just say that to them. There might be nothing good about it. Is there anything else good? Well, sometimes when we get home really late, I get to skip my shower. Oh, I hear that. I've had nights I wanted to skip a shower. I get that. Right. So this is helping them see that it is not lucky, but it's not totally unlucky either. Ahren, you didn't ask me a really fundamental question that I wondered if you might, which is, why are kids so scared of being unlucky? And it's actually connected to Jacqueline's question about anxiety. Anxiety, by the way, not generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, but we all have anxieties. We all have things we worry about. And one of the things we worry about is that due to circumstances beyond our control, bad things will just keep happening to us. Right? That's what unlucky means. Unlucky means due to circumstance, due to things totally outside my control, bad things keep happening or a bad thing happens. And that's scary, mostly because of what you addressed, Jacqueline. Then what? And yet, so many people who have achieved dreams talk about in their story things happening that didn't go the way they thought they wanted them to at the time. There was some really interesting research from NPR some years ago, or rather, I heard about it on NPR. It was not from NPR, and I don't know the source, talking about family narratives and generational expectations. And what they showed is that families whose family story about specifically financial success were rags to riches, that next generation often really struggled to find their own financial footing. And that families where they'd had a real tumble in fortunes from doing really well to, maybe there was an economic collapse or a job loss or an injury or whatever, and the family lost a bunch of wealth. Those people, that younger generation, they were pretty much on average with the number of people who did better than they had been doing or stayed the same or got worse. But the families who told cyclic stories of this bad thing happened a couple of generations ago, and this is how bad things were, and then we moved to another country and we had nothing and we did these things and we managed to succeed for a while, and then something else hard happened. The people who had long enough stories to hear about the cyclic nature, that next generation were the most likely to succeed in however they defined success. So when we allow kids not to only tell hopeful, lucky, wonderful stories and punish them when they don't, even if we're just punishing them like with our tone or our words or our reaction, when we don't just allow them to tell, it's so unfair, it wasn't my fault kind of stories, but when we help them see that in their daily life, in the game that they're playing, in their play with toys, that good things happen and bad things happen, and then good things happen and then bad things happen, they actually end up the most resilient.
I can definitely relate to this as a registered play therapist. Like when you're in the room and the trauma narrative is
Oh, yeah.
and on and on. And I think through that play, they're building that new storyline, basically, and that resilience and that new, like, okay, this happy ending is possible. Right. So I think that really speaks to the trauma that these kids can go through, or anything for that matter, anything that goes, that anything bad happens, we are helping them rebuild new stories. So I definitely see that.
Is your name pronounced Priya?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Priya, this reminds me of something I saw, and I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you see an idiom or a phrase that a lot of people say, and it really makes you think. And I still haven't decided what I think of this one. This one was a meme that said, "It'll be okay in the end, and if it's not okay, it's not the end." And I still don't know exactly what I think of that, but what I like about it is that if you don't like where you're at, you can just decide it's not the end of the story. And
Exactly.
this is something that kids are great at.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen that. Like some of the creativity that kids can come up with. And then I think we try to add that to the cognitive behavioral therapy side to it with adults, right? Where it's like, it's
We
okay.
try.
Yeah, we try, but with kids, like the toys, their language and the creativity that comes, I'm like always impressed and amazed. I'm like, wow. Like we
One
have
part
so
of it, I
much to
think,
learn.
is that in play, we don't ask kids to be as fact bound as we
Exactly.
ask adults when they're recounting experiences. So, and I'm not saying we encourage kids to lie, but I mean,
Oh
we
no.
we allow for more creativity in play because imagination is welcomed. Whereas in therapy, imagination is not usually so welcomed. In
Right.
friend communication about why your day was so bad, I'm not looking for the creative version of what happened to you. I'm looking for you to tell me the truth so that we keep trust between us. But it takes some creativity sometimes to start to think about how this really hard, awful thing might also be we would, in my parlance, we would say a blessing. So
Right. Right.
my mother-in-law of blessed memory, she was diagnosed with what turned out to be a life-ending brain tumor in September of 2019. And her prognosis, medically speaking, was probably like 5 to 10 months. And boy, we were so sad at her funeral in February of 2020. But by April of 2020, we realized that if she had been, because she had to be out of her home, she was in a nursing home. If she'd been alone and we'd been so totally cut off from her and unable to visit, especially because cognitively, by that point, because of the brain tumor, she wouldn't have understood why we weren't there, but she would have remembered that we were supposed to be there. That would have been even harder. And so that narrative in our family changed from, oh, that brain tumor and we lost her so fast, to lucky or blessed or whatever your language is and your beliefs are around that.
One other quick thought, and then we'll let you get back to the presentation, but is there's a lot of research with Carol Dworkin and others on growth mindset that is directly connected to resilience, right? And so
Yes.
developing over time, I have a previously super anxious kid who was a perfectionist. And from 3 on, we've been working on growth mindset. He's 10 now, and it was amazing because the other day he made a comment and he said, well, Mom, I really need to work on the development of that. And then he got his soccer sheet about the things he's doing well in soccer and the things he needs to improve. And I gave it to him to read. And after the next game, he said, Mom, did you see how I was looking over the field and really thinking about the strategy of the whole field and not just me? And I said, wow, that's great. He said, it was on my list of things I have to improve on. But it's taken years to develop that growth mindset, but we have it now. And he's constantly like, okay, I didn't do as well on that. so I can grow. How do I grow on it? How do I get better? And how do I focus on the development there? And then how do I celebrate the things that I'm already doing well and balance that? And I find that that has also really built his resilience, because he's not knocked down so much now. When something goes wrong, it's like, oh, that was a mistake. So let's work harder the next time, or let's learn from it so that things can maybe be different. So
it is because of the growth mindset work. And Arturo, I'm coming to you. Give me 1 second. It's because of the growth mindset work that we are all here talking about mesh. Because a generation ago, the research would have said anxious kids are just anxious, sensitive kids are just sensitive. People who struggle with change just struggle with change, just who they are. Bad readers are just bad readers, right? And that work in the 90s and beyond has shown all of us that everybody may have a different starting line with any of those things I just mentioned, and lots of other things besides, like athleticism and musical ability and artisticness, but that all of those can grow. Now, I may never be an Olympic athlete. Since I'm 53, that seems pretty likely. But I can get more athletic. And somebody else may already be an incredible athlete and be able to improve their skills, not as much as I can improve mine because I have a lot more room to grow, but they can still improve their skills a little bit every day. So that growth mindset applies to all of mesh work. Mesh wouldn't have made any sense about 30 years ago. Arturo, what were you going to say?
Yeah, first, the L, you were looking for live action.
Live action. Thank you. Not long acting. Right. Long acting is medicines. So you can see how I got there. Sorry.
Gotcha. And then the question I had was, what is a good age to to start incorporating this methodology or some of these skills that are based around like optimism?
So any of these skills about the narrative, the story that you tell, you actually start with your kids, whether you mean to or not, as soon as they understand language. So when your 10-month-old pulls themselves up to stand and flops back down, you can either say, and you've seen this, right? Oh, are you okay? You fell. Be careful. I don't want you to be there. That could be. Or you say, that was strong. Do you have a boo-boo that needs to be kissed? And when your kid falls, if you immediately go to, wow, that was dramatic, or whoa, cool ninja skills, or oh my gosh, what were you doing over there by the couch by yourself, right? So we start to teach kids how to frame what they've been. Did you get a little stronger that time? What did you learn from that? Whoa, even if they are not going to answer you because they are 10 months old, right? But we start those patterns pretty much immediately. Now, one of the things about raising a toddler is that uncovers all your own family of origin stuff. If you lead at all an examined life, and not everybody does, but if you examine it at all, you're going to see a lot about how you were raised and what your fundamental beliefs are about some of these things in what you, if you're speaking out loud, in the narrative that you give to your little kids. The good news is they don't remember much from their first 2 or 3 years. So it gives you a chance. It makes an impression. It starts to teach them patterns and paths, but they won't remember what you said. So it gives you a chance to think, that's what I said. Is that what I want to continue, or would I like to maybe change that narrative too?
Rick, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Dr. G.
Hi.
As I've aged and looked at research and everything, or read books about your fate, a lot is dictated by where you're born. So my question is, kids, let's say in Kenya, Haiti versus United States versus others, the optimism scale, since they may not know what the world is different from them as opposed to us. And of course, this all has blossomed since social media and everything can be live and, personal almost. How is there any research that says a child born in a lower economic, which we know would be a much bigger struggle versus the privilege that we have, I think, here, or is optimism sort of contained within your environment and it can still be positive, negative, or other, or are we truly lucky here in the United States?
By my definition of luck, I think we are lucky to have been born in the United States, or live here because of opportunity to impact our future, right? That's really what we're talking about, is how much do you get to do your choices impact what happens to you? The truth is that in kids, and by kids, I'm going to say kids under 10, it turns out that these things are not that considering ourselves lucky, whatever that looks like in that culture, blessed, whatever it is, and resilience and optimism and those kinds of things, there's the same variation that we see in, across different countries. Where it gets really interesting to me is a little bit maybe about what you're asking about, is in the same society, right? In the same communities or larger, maybe like a county, say, for example, where kids are going to more quickly see those differences and variations. It's right around middle school and the uptick of social interactions and now social media, where people start to feel more stuck. And it's a comparison issue.
Thank
Hey,
you.
before I have to go, I would like to end with this idea, and that is, when you think about what could we be doing to help kids with their narrative, their prospective, how they expect this to go, and their retrospective, it turns out that in the prospective, what's really useful is to say to kids, when this goes wrong, or for example, if you're selling a game, to say, which game here do you think would be fun to play even when you lose? I had a rule at my house with my boys when they were at that age where they're 6 years top to bottom of 4 boys, right? And they would get really competitive and really scratchy and come to me, so mad that they lost. And I'd be like, you're only allowed to pick games from the shelf that you enjoy so much that it's fun even if you lose, because you're going to lose sometimes, especially the younger kids, but really all of them. So prospectively, we should talk about when, not even if, when you lose, which game here looks like it'd be fun to play even when you lose. Retrospectively, we're talking about something behind us. We say, so a thing that happened to you that you didn't like, can you help me see a positive that also, not instead of, not but a good thing came out of it, but and a good thing came out of it. It was hard and. So looking for the positive backwards and anticipating the struggle forward, those things help kids improve their narrative.
Mm-hmm. I was going to add a plug in really quick, Dr. G. This has been great, but it's making me think of your October Dr. G chat, where you talked about kids needing competence to have confidence. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of the things we talked about today with luck, with people being more lucky, having typically more resilience, typically having more optimism, they're also more willing to take chances. And kids can't take chances if they're not competent.
And not just take chances, by the way. There's some really interesting research from, hang on, I had it pulled up because I wanted to be able to name it for you guys. It was reported on by PBS, but the research came out of University of Texas, that people who consider themselves lucky notice more chances. They notice more opportunities than people who consider themselves unlucky. And I thought that was so interesting. That was in adults, but we're talking about building this in kids, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been an awesome Dr. G chat today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
It's always full of insights. I always walk away with my brain spinning with lots of ideas. So thank you so much always for doing this for us, Dr. G.
Take care, everybody.